Okay, welcome back. Hello, everyone. Now that we know we're just tender, vulnerable beings, we can settle in and welcome Stefan Julich, presenting Esoteric Traditions, the work of Mirra Alfassa. Please welcome Stefan.
So the title of my presentation is, Western Esotericism and the Teachings of Mother Mirra Alfassa, and I wrote this up here because I didn't have the sheet in front of me. My current research is a comparative study of the Mother's teachings on death and transformation using a Jungian lens. And today I want to discuss the historical background of my research, which is the second chapter of my dissertation, concentrating on the Mother and Jung's milieu, but especially on the Mother's experiences while she was in Europe. The Mother once said that the biographical events of her life were of no importance whatsoever, and from a devotional perspective I would agree. As an embodiment of the Divine Mother, she was not her particular biography. But the symbols and ideas that the Mother used in her teaching were drawn from her lived experiences as Mirra Alfassa. And although it's quite possible to understand her from within the integral yoga tradition alone, to understand her expanded context is so much richer a way to appreciate her genius, I feel, and the ways in which she was very much a child of her times. This can also, is this still on? Mm-hmm. This can also help us understand Sri Aurobindo's writings, and especially Savitri.
You might be still on, but maybe move a little closer to it. You did die out at the end.
Yeah, it sounds, is it working?
No, it doesn't seem to.
Something's working. Point at this, so you're standing.
That's good. I'm not,
No, it changed.
Something changed. Testing. Oh yeah, it's off.
Sorry, on this was good.
A little bit.
Batteries were just down.
Yeah, I think it's better.
It should be green, not red. Do you know if there's a
that's all right.
backup battery?
I'll keep talking while they're changing the battery. I'll just try and speak up. So of course, both the Mother and Jung stress that at the level of mind, reality is always a paradox of opposites that must be held in tension until the third thing arises. That's what Jung called the tertium non datur. And the opposites could be transcended, but then immediately a new term constellates itself with its own opposite. This is kind of a never-ending cycle that goes on. We're all familiar with the use of many of these terms. What I want to point out is that not one of them remains unchallenged. In academia today, they're all contested. We'll just take one of them, psychology. It's one of our favorites, right? Well, the study of psychology is the study of the soul. And yet today, the dominant model of psychology doesn't even recognize the soul as existing. So that's the way in which these kinds of tensions arise. We all love to make sense, but all of our definitions are partial, and all of our understanding is incomplete. The Mother once said, unless you are prepared to hold the opposite belief to the one that you actually hold, you'll never come close to understanding the truth. So, we all love coloring books. Yeah, I know you got Hello Kitty at home too. And there are lots of nice, strong black outlines in coloring books, and we spend so much time when we're kids learning how to color in the lines. And Sam actually was speaking to this in the last talk, to learn to be as accurate as possible. And that can take us a half a lifetime or even a full lifetime to unlearn. That's a tension of opposites right there. So I want you to keep this in mind as I speak. I'll be using many, if not all, of the terms I just showed you, and it's important to realize that these are merely convenient ways to discuss a broad range of phenomena that would otherwise be impossible to discuss. This might seem trite, but I think we need to remind ourselves every once in a while that as profoundly intricate and beautiful as the universe is, reality has no permanent outlines. As one of my favorite scholars, he's a perennialist, I don't know if you can read it, Algis Uzdavinas wrote, every conceptually and visually manifested landscape of our existence is a hermeneutical construct. Good thing to keep in mind. Now, having said that, I'm going to try and make some sense, so please forgive me. The Mother and Jung were born just 3 years apart. Jung was born in Switzerland in 1875, and the mother was born in Paris in 1878, so they were contemporaries. They shared a very common cultural matrix. One of the great struggles in Europe at the time of their births was the tension between Enlightenment rationalism and counter-Enlightenment romanticism. But perhaps the most important aspect of this was the waning influence of the church and the concomitant rise of scientific materialism. Jung said that this false dichotomy between religion and science that developed during this period caused no end of confusion, especially among the sciences. Principally because materialists, struggling to free themselves from Catholic dogma, failed to understand that matter as a hypostatic concept is every bit as much an hypothesis as spirit. So, I don't know if you know God from Monty Python's Holy Grail. So, these are hypotheses. Along with science, there were rebuffs to the church from Protestantism and occult and esoteric schools. Science, Protestantism, and 19th century occultism rose as heterodox forces that challenged the church's social and political dominance, but wound up warring against one another as well. Most of us here are at least familiar enough with the scientific and Protestant revolutions that I don't feel I need to discuss them. I also don't have the time. But much weirder, I think, and much more interesting was the development of occult and esoteric schools, which began to proliferate during this period. Two of the more important occult movements taking place from the 18th century were mesmerism and spiritualism, though there were many more. Even Western psychology began as an attempt to reconcile the tension between scientific rationalism and the more occult magical romanticism. Early psychologists such as Freud and Jung and others, Charcot, Genet, spent many research hours studying occult phenomena. Jung was particularly interested in the occult and even wrote his dissertation about transmediumship. So the mother, she was born in Paris to cosmopolitan, atheist, materialist, Egyptian, and Turkish Sephardic Jews. What this meant, I believe, is that she was born remarkably free of many of the ancient prejudices of European religions and nationalisms, and insulated from the normal oppressions of women, Jews, and non-Europeans because of her economic status. Her father was a banker, I believe. She was highly educated, studied painting, lived and worked with some of the great Impressionists. I believe that she was actually a secretary to Rodin for a while. She was a free thinker. She was by her own admission, a hard-headed pragmatist, unimpressed by claims to knowledge she could not validate for herself. She was not, however, a materialist. When she was only 5 years old, she began to experience a transcendent light illuminating her from above. Although the family disapproved of such nonsense, young Mirra experienced this light as objectively real. Now, you don't mess with somebody who has a face like that. 5 years old. She reminds me of my daughter. In later life, her major work would be the development of yoga that was designed to join that light with the material world through the medium of her body. By 13, she had visions of herself draped in a starry robe floating high above Paris during World War I, protecting the city's children. And by 20, she had achieved what she called a permanent and abiding union with the divine. Most of us know the mother as the spiritual partner of Sri Aurobindo, and she certainly felt that carrying his work forward was her most important task. She spent her last 53 years in India, and largely left her European life behind, but her training was as a Western occultist. A fact that she never denied. I think this is really important. Sri Aurobindo was quoted as saying that the mother came to India of a realized being. So the realization came from somewhere. Her experiences came to her spontaneously, when she was very young, as did Sri Aurobindo's actually. However, as Sri Aurobindo couched his revelation in Vedic symbolism, so the mother couched hers in Western occult symbolism. In her 20s, she began to study with an occultist whose name was Max Théon. Théon's teachings were a mix of Kabbalah, Merkaba mysticism, Chaldean Enochian mysteries, Egyptian hermeticism, and Tantra. And according to the mother, he also had a deep knowledge of Sanskrit and Vedic symbolism. It was Théon who gave the mother a cosmology to go with her visionary insights. The very first time that the mother met Théon's wife Alma, who was a gifted clairvoyant, Madame Théon had a vision of her with a halo of stars. This vision was of the mother as Isis or Mary, or Hecate from the Orphic Mysteries, and validated for Alma something that Mirra already knew, that she was an incarnation of the principle that we call the Divine Mother. Théon's cosmology has many similarities to Gnostic ideas of the creator being or beings turning against God through pride of what they assumed was their own agency in the creation. In Théon's cosmology, there were 4 of these asuras. As the mother related, when these 4, who were light, life, bliss, and truth, turned away from the absolute, they became, light became darkness, life became death, bliss became suffering, and truth became falsehood. In Théon's version of the story, with the turning of these beings, the universal mother descends into matter to combat them, and her passage creates the various subtle worlds in her wake. The mother's descent is the descent of love into the dark, inconscient matter to heal the wound at the heart of creation. Love to the mother was a direct revelation from the divine, one of the first powers of the absolute. The parallel to this in Gnostic teaching of the divine Sophia and her descent into a world in crisis should be apparent to anybody that knows a little bit of Gnosticism. And in Sri Aurobindo Savitri, which the mother said is a poetic telling of her yogic experiences, Savitri follows the soul of her husband into the underworld to retrieve him from the Lord of Death. It was the mother's task to struggle with the asura of death and to convert him back to his original form as the agent of life. The story has parallels in many countries of the world. The motif of retrieval of a spouse abducted by death is pretty much universal. Théon, as did Sri Aurobindo, taught that there was an ancient tradition that predated both Europe and India, which fed into both. This common cultural root, they believed, was responsible for there being so many similarities evident in the deeper layers of symbolism we see between India and the Judeo-Christian cultures of Europe. Just to point out a few of the similarities between Sri Aurobindo's Vedas and Théon's Jewish mysticism, because Théon was rooted more in Jewish mysticism. Both in Véda and Torah, scripture is seen as the actual visual and or oral architecture of creation. In the Hebrew text, the letters, it's more visual. That's the architecture of creation, whereas in Sanskrit it's more oral. But in both it's the text itself. In India, the body has 3 channels called nadis, and in Kabbalah the body has 3 channels which are called the sephirot. There are really interesting things with words as well, and if anybody's interested in this, you can look at a book by Barbara Holdridge called Véda and Torah, where she goes into this into some detail. But in India, a practitioner is often called a sadhak, right? S-A-D-H-A-K, but whereas in Jewish mysticism, a practitioner or a seeker of truth is called a zadok. And you find that a lot of the words are actually in common, and nobody really understands where this common root might be, or if there is one, but there seem to be these really enticing hints. Also, the concept of God as both masculine and feminine are present in both India and in Jewish mysticism. So coming back to Théon, he was the founder of the Hermetic Brotherhood of Luxor. This esoteric order was the seedbed for many of the more popular occult societies of the late 19th and early 20th centuries. Théon was a teacher to Madame Blavatsky, Aleister Crowley, and even Rudolf Steiner, according to Jocelyn Godwin. The Brotherhood had a direct influence then on the founding of the Theosophical Society, the Order of the Golden Dawn, Crowley's Ordo Templi Orientis, and Steiner's Anthroposophy. And very little people know who this guy Théon is. And he had such a vast influence on 20th century esotericism and occultism. We can trace the Brotherhood back further through history to this character, who Pascal Beverly Randolph. Randolph was one of the most fascinating unsung heroes of the occult movement. Randolph was of mixed African and European ancestry. He was a student of African American conjure and folk magic. He was an early and active abolitionist, founder of the first Rosicrucian order on American soil, a trance medium, and an advocate of the use of hashish to induce visionary states. It was Randolph who brought knowledge of Western tantric and sex mysteries to Théon from a tribal community in Syria called the Nusairi. And these teachings, which focused on sexual union of masculine and feminine energies, were to have a profound influence on the Brotherhood and the later Golden Dawn and the Ordo Templi Orientis. In America, Randolph was a student of clairvoyant Andrew Jackson Davis. Davis claimed to have been taught by the spirit of Emanuel Swedenborg. And Swedenborg, whose knowledge largely came through the influence of angelic beings, also had a pedigree that ran back through Ficino, Platon, Proclus to Plato, and back into the Orphic mysteries. So, deeply connected, but what does all this have to do with the mother? Last year, I spoke very briefly here about the central sun as part of my talk. Each one of these individuals that I just mentioned, from Plato to Théon and beyond, Blavatsky and others, and I would argue the mother and Sri Aurobindo, although not specifically, teach of the mystery of the central sun. The central sun is the transcendent or hypercosmic source of our sun and the universe. Right? It's the source of all existence. It is, as Swedenborg said, the sun of life, as opposed to our sun, which is the sun of death. Everything that happens beneath our sun is subject to death.
2 minutes.
Nice. In Savitri, the figure of Yama, the Lord of Death, is seen as a veil or a doorway that masks the Absolute. This veil is the sun itself, as told in the lines of the Ishopanishad, Hiranmayena Patrina, Satyasa Pihitam Mukham, Tatvam Pusham Apavrenu, Satya Dharmaya Drishta. Yama is one of the 108 names of the sun in the Veda, a child of Surya Savitur, the sun deity, and Aditi, the divine mother. He is also considered an aspect of Shiv, Lord of creation and destruction. The so-called sinister yogis sought to pass through the sun door, the door of death in life, in order to transcend this world and reach the Absolute, symbolized by Shiv. Yesterday in Alessandra's class, Laura was saying that she saw death as a mentor. And in Sri Aurobindo's yoga, he says that without death, we would become spiritually lazy. It's there to act as a goad for us. It is our mentor, and the door through which we must pass if we're going to transcend. Most people, including many integralists, don't realize how profoundly influential Théon was on Sri Aurobindo's framing of integral yoga, even though both the mother and Sri Aurobindo spoke of him. Théon taught the physical perfectibility and eventual immortality of humanity through the union of matter and spirit, what Sri Aurobindo and the mother called the supramental being. The terms involution, evolution, and psychic being were Théon's, which the mother brought with her to Pondicherry. Even the triple transformation, which is central to integral yoga, was present in Théon's teaching. Interestingly, all of these, with the exception of psychic being, were present in Randolph's teachings as well. The symbol the mother designed for Sri Aurobindo was adapted from Théon's. The two triangles are alchemical symbols present in both India and Europe. The upward one is masculine, the downward pointing one is feminine. The upward is fire, the downward is water. Strangely, these two in conjunction are the ancient Jewish symbol for the Divine Mother, the mystery of the union of fire and water, which is the Star of David, and also the mystery of the alchemical union. The symbol of the mother designed for Sri Aurobindo used the term Chaitya Purush, conscious being, until the mother suggested Théon's psychic being as an English equivalent. Both the Chaitya Purush and the psychic being are said to reside in a cave at the back of the heart, Hridaya Guyam in Sanskrit. While in the Veda this image is often associated with the theft of the sun by demons, in this Christian icon, the sun as Christ is born within the cave, which is the womb of the mother. So this is the Jewish Holy of Holies in the Temple of Solomon. The triple transformation was present in alchemical and tantric systems from ancient times. The goal of this transformation in alchemy is the unus mundus, the divinization of the enlightened body. The goal in integral yoga is the supramental being, the union of matter and spirit as a further evolution of consciousness in embodied form. In Théon's cosmology, this being was called the Cor Gloriam, an image from the mysteries of ancient Judaism wherein Enoch, the patriarch Enoch, was given a glimpse of God and transformed into a being of light, the angel Metatron. This is important to remember because both Sri Aurobindo and Théon taught that these ideas branched from a common source. Even so, the particular inflections were both Indian and Western, in Western predominantly Jewish, mystical. How these parallels could exist is a fascinating mystery that might never be solved. Finally, the point I wish to make here, and that I make in my second chapter, is that the mother came to Pondicherry with a complete and complex Western esoteric cosmological foundation, which provided a referential map for her own spiritual realization, as did the Vedas for Sri Aurobindo's. And I would say that when you read Savitri, you will find an equal part both the mother and Sri Aurobindo in that work. And it's from their ensuing conversation that the mother and Sri Aurobindo's teachings of integral yoga come down to us.
How long before Sri Aurobindo died, mother met him?
They met, I don't remember the exact year, I think it was 1914. Was it 1914 that they met? 1914, and he died in 1950, I believe. Maybe 1951, but it was like just around 1950.
So it means that at that time, Sri Aurobindo was kind of in his 40s, 50s? 40s, yeah.
He died in his late 70s,
And so he
in
was,
1953, so he was around middle age, approaching middle age.
so he was approaching middle age, and definitely mother was also a young woman. We are.
Well, Sri Aurobindo is actually only 6 years older than the monk.
Yeah, yeah. So I said she was also a younger woman. So I heard a lot about Sri Aurobindo and mother and their spiritual marriage, but I never heard anything about their romantic relationship.
Yeah, there's been I've heard speculation about it. I can't take it seriously only because of what I know about the two of them and in my readings. The mother was married. She had a child, but her life was a devotional life. You know, I was talking about her occult training, but really what the mother is about is her devotional life, her devotion to God, and her union with the divine. This is just a language that she brought with her
Yeah, so
to discuss it. When she got to India, she was celibate. Sri Aurobindo, there's some speculation that Sri Aurobindo never actually consummated his marriage, his actual marriage. And his wife died on her way to the ashram. And he never married after that. So at least what they said publicly, and I have no reason to doubt it, is that not only were they celibate, but that the sadhaks, the people who came to the ashram, had to be celibate in order to do the yoga. Their yoga started where all of the yogas, including the tantric practices, ended. And it required, to really do the yoga, it required absolute strict celibacy. So, you know, your guess, what happens behind closed doors, your guess is as good as mine, but I'll honor their words and what they say. They're not talking, the mother spoke very specifically about what she called the problems with sex yoga that happened in Europe. She felt that people really misunderstood the teachings, and that the teachings for her, I'm not saying in actuality, but the teachings for her were symbolic.
So what you say, implicitly, you claim that sexuality is kind of out of spirituality, you know? Marina is here, you know, so...
Yeah.
And I think so, if, you know, so they didn't see any potency in any, I don't say sex, but it appears to me that they didn't see any potency in sexuality. It's interaction.
Yeah, this is a whole talk in and of itself. It's very complicated. It's not black and white. The mother said on more than one occasion in conversations in the agenda, or conversations with one of her students at Sakram, but also publicly, that if a person was drawn to live a physical life, which included sex, whether they did it in, under the auspices of marriage, or whether they did it as part of a tantric practice, then that's the path that they were drawn to. And that tantric practice could be tremendously transformative. What she was saying, it was according to Sri Aurobindo and her, that the supramental transformation, which is the ultimate union of matter and spirit, that their yoga, which was an attempt to complete this process, starts after all of the other practices, and it requires celibacy. They didn't say that sex was bad. However, at the same time, Sri Aurobindo is quoted, and the mother also, as saying that matter, the material world, is somehow fallen. They don't couch it in the same way. I mean, fallen is a really loaded term. It's not really couched in Western, it sounds like it's couched in Western terms because we're using English. But what they say is that consciousness itself, as the material world begins to kind of separate out from the descent of consciousness, that there are places within the deepest and darkest parts of matter where consciousness may not be able to reach. And they felt that the entirety of creation could be bumped up through this yoga that they were performing. Sri Aurobindo said it was inevitable that this would happen, that matter is just a stage in evolution, that mind, the level of mind, the development of human thinking and reasoning consciousness is just a stage in evolution. That's what the whole evolution of consciousness is about. So I think that they wouldn't go so far as to say sex bad, don't do it. They would say each person needs to follow the path that they're on. But there is, it's a little sticky for me, even for me, when I hear things like matter is fallen, or
so what I just can come with is if they had that transmission, maybe they could succeed the marriage of matter and the spirit that they were looking for. Maybe this is the step that they didn't take, and as you once mentioned, Mother failed.
yeah. Well, I don't know if she failed. It seems that she passed away. It seems that she died. But I've been to the Samadhi in Pondicherry, and it is extraordinary. And I can, I'm a devotee, and I came to her without knowing who she was, and I looked at her picture and I began to cry because I knew that she was the one that brought me to the school. Do I think that she's everybody's divine mother? No. It's an individual relationship, and I wouldn't try and impose it on anybody else. In terms of the supramental yoga having been fulfilled, I can't say. I know that I've had extraordinary experiences in and around the teaching. In alchemy, which Jung studied, the final stage is death. It's necessary. The final alchemical transformation only takes place when the body is dropped. What the mother and Sri Aurobindo were saying was that the body can be transformed if you pass through the sun door completely consciously. That affecting that bridge between spirit and matter could change the nature of physical reality itself. We would no longer be gendered because there would be no longer a need for material procreation. There are all kinds of concomitant things that happen as a result of this set of transformations, but it's really easy to get to moralize. It's really easy to point a finger and say, what you're doing is bad, you're not a good integralist, you're not doing the yoga. And that's more of a cult aspect of it, which I really kind of am not particularly interested in myself. I'm much more interested in the mystery, and in my dissertation it's much more of a conversation between Jung's kind of alchemical musings and the mother's conversations around this. And I can say right now that I don't actually really come to any conclusion in the dissertation because I can't answer the question myself.
Thank you.
In terms of the mystery and this presentation and the esoteric and occult traditions that, for me at least, this presentation has put the mother and Sri Aurobindo's work in the context of this kind of carrying of the esoteric traditions that alchemy has participated in, and the Gnostics, and many others that you named, Theosophists and such. I guess my question is, was that your intention in presenting this material, to place their work in that context? And if not, what is your intention in presenting this aspect?
In presenting or in the research itself? Because going into the research, I just wanted to try and understand what I was facing, because I had this relationship developing with the mother that I didn't understand. It was a mystery, and I was beginning to read integral literature, and I found it really interesting, especially the mother for me. Sri Aurobindo's his language is sometimes difficult, although I'd have to say that I agree with what integralists say about Savitri. It's one of the most remarkable pieces of writing that I've ever read. It's like a living Sri Yantra. But the deeper I got into it, looking at it from Jung's perspective, I began to see that what the mother and Sri Aurobindo were talking about really had resonance with Western teachings. So I began to look at the teachings themselves, and the mother gives you hints. She tells you she was a student of this character Max Théon, and very little has been written about Max Théon, but I went to the source material. I went to everything that I could find, and Théon's cosmic philosophy, cosmic something, anyway, the cosmic movement, which the mother translated before she met Sri Aurobindo, Many, many, many volumes. I have the first 24 that were translated into English. She translated them from English into French, and the English originals were lost. So somebody translated one volume, 24 volumes, 24 chapters of one volume into English, and I read it, and I was completely floored because Savitri is right there in this document that Théon wrote in the 1870s originally, and he carried forward with him. The mother brought these documents with her to India. So, part of me is like, what is it that I'm getting into? Because this could be from the perspective of an integralist who believes that their teacher is the perfect teacher, an avatar, who downloaded this material along with his incarnation. What does that mean? And for me, there's so much more richness in the complexity of these beings. I mean, Sri Aurobindo spoke English. He had an Indian body. The mother spoke French. They didn't speak they didn't speak Sanskrit. They didn't come down into incarnation speaking some alternate language or with blue skin or stuff like that. They were actually embedded in the culture. They were embedded in the DNA of their present moment. So for me, there's so much more richness in understanding that these symbols they're awash in these symbols, and that it's their awakening, their spiritual awakening. Sri Aurobindo's two-part awakening of the transcendent absolute and the personal deity, the Krishna, that he experienced when he was in the dockets in jail on trial in Calcutta. And the mother's experiences beginning when she was 5 years old and leading to when she was 20 years old. These are spiritual openings. But the spiritual opening, the awakening, doesn't necessarily come with the cosmology. The cosmology, Aurobindo's cosmology, largely comes from the Véda. And what I began to discover was that the mother's cosmology largely comes from Théon. And she talks about it openly in the agenda, and yet I don't hear it, I don't see it written. Integralists will often say, oh, the mother, yeah, she was an occultist, and Théon. But Sri Aurobindo, Sri Aurobindo, Sri Aurobindo. And it's much more complex. Sri Aurobindo said that the mother came enlightened, and that half of the teaching of integral yoga is the mother's teaching. And I think we have to take that really seriously. People don't. People say, oh, the mother, and Sri Aurobindo becomes front and center, the only thing. And Sri Aurobindo himself, when he retired in 1926 from being active in the ashram, said to the disciples, surrender to the mother. Mirra Alfassa is transparent to that energy of the Divine Mother. When you surrender to Mirra Alfassa, you surrender to the Divine Mother, not to Mirra, the Egyptian Turkish Jew from Paris. You are surrendering to the force that she's representing in the Lord, just as Sri Aurobindo represented the Lord, what Mirra Alfassa called the Lord, the masculine side of it. So it's very, very complex, I think.
Thank you. Yeah, thank you very much.